The date was October 28th, 1944. Somewhere near Nancy, France, the sound of jeep engines cut through the autumn air. A column of American tanks sat parked in formation, their crews standing at rigid attention beside the massive Sherman tanks that would soon carry them into battle. These weren't just any soldiers, they were the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, and they were about to meet a legend. Military police took up defensive positions around the area, their machine guns at the ready. Then came the distinctive vehicle everyone recognized, a single jeep carrying a man with two ivory-handled pistols holstered at his belt. General George Patton had arrived. He vaulted onto the hood of an armored car with the energy and swagger that made him famous, his boots planted firmly, his eyes surveying the formation of soldiers before him. What happened next would become one of the most famous speeches of the war, though few people know the full context of what it meant. Patton's voice rang out across the assembled ranks, clear and commanding. "Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down." The soldiers stood taller. They felt the weight of history on their shoulders, but also a surge of pride. Patton, the legendary general, had just told them they were the best. He had said he didn't care about their color. To these men, who had endured years of discrimination, segregation, and doubt about their abilities, these words meant everything. They didn't know what Patton had written in his diary that very afternoon. They didn't know that he had recorded his belief that they gave a good impression, but that he had no faith in the inherent fighting ability of the race. They didn't know that in his memoir, he would write that a colored soldier cannot think fast enough to fight in armor. All they knew was that they had a chance to prove themselves, and they were determined to take it. The road to that moment in France had been long and painful. The 761st Tank Battalion was formed on April 1st, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. From the very beginning, the men who joined this unit faced obstacles that had nothing to do with enemy fire. The United States military in 1942 was completely segregated. Military leaders at the highest levels held deeply racist views about the capabilities of black soldiers. Colonel James Moss had declared them second-class material, citing what he called inferior intelligence and lack of mental and moral qualities. Colonel Percy Miles had stated bluntly that in future wars, the main use of black soldiers should be in labor organizations. These weren't fringe opinions. They represented the mainstream thinking of the American military establishment. Out of the entire United States Army in 1940, only 5 black officers held commissions, and 3 of those were chaplains. The overwhelming majority of black soldiers were assigned to support roles: cooks, truck drivers, stevedores, laborers. The idea of black men commanding tanks, the most technologically advanced and strategically important weapons of modern warfare, was almost unthinkable to most military leaders. But a few voices pushed back against this prejudice. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, Chief of Army Ground Forces, recognized that America could not afford to ignore its black citizens as a source of manpower. The war demanded every capable soldier, regardless of color. McNair became the primary advocate for allowing black soldiers to serve in armored units, fighting against fierce resistance from his peers. When the 761st was formed, it was given a white commander, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, as was standard practice at the time. But Bates was different from most white officers. He didn't see command of a black unit as a career death sentence. He saw it as an opportunity. He believed in his men, and more importantly, he was determined to train them so thoroughly that no one could question their combat readiness. The men who arrived at Camp Claiborne came from all walks of life, from all corners of the country. Some were farmers, others were factory workers, students, athletes. Among them was a young lieutenant named Jack Roosevelt Robinson, who would later become famous for breaking baseball's color barrier. These men shared a common dream: to prove that they belonged, that they could fight, that they deserved to be treated as equals. The training they received was unlike anything given to most tank units. While white tank battalions were often rushed through training and sent overseas in 3 to 6 months, the 761st trained for nearly 2 years. This wasn't because the army had high expectations for them, it was the opposite. The military hierarchy simply didn't know what to do with them. They weren't wanted at the front, so they were kept in training, endlessly drilling, practicing, perfecting their skills. Bates used this time wisely. He pushed his men relentlessly, knowing that they would be judged more harshly than any white unit. Every mistake would be seen as evidence of racial inferiority. Every success would be dismissed as an exception. The only way to overcome this prejudice was to be so good that no one could deny their excellence. The men trained on M5 Stuart light tanks initially, learning every aspect of armored warfare: gunnery, mechanics, tactics, coordination with infantry. They conducted maneuvers that tested their skills against other units and consistently performed as well as or better than white battalions. But excellence in training didn't shield them from the brutal reality of racism in 1940s America. Camp Claiborne was in Louisiana, deep in the segregated South. The 761st was housed in a separate area about a mile from the main gate, where the roads were dirt and the living conditions were inferior. The men lived in canvas tents next to the camp's sewage treatment facility. When they received passes to go into town, they faced constant humiliation. They had to sit in the back of buses, wait until white soldiers had boarded first, and stand even when seats were available. Bus drivers carried pistols to enforce these rules. If a black soldier refused to comply or committed any minor infraction, the driver would stop at the nearest military police station and have the offender dragged away. The surrounding towns were hostile territory. Black soldiers were refused service at restaurants, barred from most establishments, and subjected to verbal abuse and threats of violence. They were training to defend their country, yet their country treated them as second-class citizens. The tensions exploded on January 10th, 1942, when a massive fight broke out between black and white troops at Camp Claiborne. The confrontation grew so serious that members of the 761st nearly mutinied, commandeering 6 tanks and preparing for armed confrontation. Only the intervention of Lieutenant Colonel Bates prevented disaster. He promised his men that he would straighten out the situation, that he would fight for them, and they trusted him enough to stand down. It was Bates who later refused to court-martial Jackie Robinson when Robinson was arrested for refusing to sit at the back of a bus at Camp Hood, Texas. Though Robinson was eventually transferred to another unit and court-martialed anyway, he was acquitted of all charges, and he never forgot Bates's support. The incident made national headlines and drew attention to the injustices faced by black soldiers. Throughout their training, the men of the 761st carried the knowledge that they were fighting for a nation that didn't fully accept them, preparing to defend freedoms they themselves didn't enjoy. In September 1943, the battalion was transferred to Camp Hood, Texas, and upgraded to medium tanks, the M4 Sherman, equipped with a 75mm cannon. This was the workhorse of American armored forces, reliable and easily repaired in the field. The men were thrilled with the upgrade. They had proved themselves worthy of the best equipment. They continued their intensive training, now with the most advanced American tank available. And then came the news they had been waiting for. On June 9, 1944, just 3 days after D-Day, the 761st Tank Battalion received orders for overseas deployment. After 2 years of training, after countless evaluations and reviews, after being rated superior by General Ben Lear and deemed combat ready, They were finally going to war. The men boarded the British transport ship Esperance Bay in New York on August 27, 1944. The voyage took 10 days, and during that time, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. They were going to be the first black armored unit in American history to see combat. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. They arrived in Britain on September 8, 1944, and were initially assigned to the Ninth Army. But then came a request from General Patton. His Third Army had sustained devastating tank losses during its rapid advance across France. By August 26, the 4th and 6th Armoured Divisions had lost a total of 269 tanks. Patton desperately needed more tankers, the best available. The only tank unit left was the 761st. When someone mentioned they were black soldiers, Patton's response was classic. "Who the hell asked for colour?" "I asked for tankers." Whether Patton truly didn't care about race or simply needed bodies for his battered divisions is debatable. What's certain is that the 761st was reassigned to his Third Army and sent to France. They landed at Omaha Beach on October 10, 1944, and moved quickly to the front lines. This was when Patton gave his famous speech, and after that speech, the real test began. The 761st Tank Battalion entered combat on November 7, 1944, attached to the 26th Infantry Division. Their first engagement came the next day, November 8th, in an assault on German positions near Vic-sur-Seille in northeastern France. The baptism of fire was immediate and brutal. As the tanks advanced along a narrow forest road, they encountered a German roadblock, felled trees and mines blocking the route. The column ground to a halt. German mortars and rifle fire immediately opened up on the American infantrymen, who dove for cover in roadside ditches. The situation was becoming desperate. Standard procedure called for waiting for combat engineers to clear the obstacle, but that would take time, and every second meant more casualties as German artillery zeroed in on their position. In the lead tank, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers made a decision. Without waiting for orders, he dismounted from his Sherman tank and walked straight toward the roadblock. Enemy rifle fire cracked around him. Bullets whined past his head, but Rivers kept moving. He reached the obstacle, attached a cable from his tank, and dragged the roadblock clear. The column surged forward. The attack succeeded. Rivers had saved lives and prevented what could have been a disastrous delay. For this action, he received the Silver Star for Valor, the first awarded to the 761st Tank Battalion. The fighting that followed was savage. The Germans were experienced, well-equipped, and determined. The 761st faced elements of some of Germany's best units, including the elite Führer Begleit Brigade. The Battle of Morville-le-Vicq was particularly brutal. Lieutenant Colonel Bates was wounded on the first night of combat, possibly by friendly fire, and evacuated. He wouldn't return until February. Despite losing their beloved commander, the men of the 761st pressed on. Tank Commander William King's lead tank was knocked out by a German Panzerfaust rocket. 2 of his crew were wounded. King personally dragged them to safety behind the tank, then went back into the fight. He was wounded himself while helping a white infantryman, but refused evacuation. A German officer later told Captain Long that King's conduct was only equaled by that of a Russian tank crew. King would be killed in action just 12 days later. The respect he had earned from his enemies was a testament to his courage. But no story from those early days of combat captures the spirit of the 761st better than the story of Reuben Rivers. On November 16, 1944, just 8 days after his first heroic action, Rivers' tank hit a landmine at a railroad crossing. The explosion sent shrapnel tearing through his leg, slashing it to the bone and destroying his knee. His company commander, Captain David Williams, ordered him evacuated immediately. Rivers refused. He pushed away the morphine injection and climbed out of the ruined tank. "Captain, you're going to need me," he said. Williams gave him a direct order to go back for medical treatment. Rivers looked at him and said something that would be remembered forever. "This is one order, the only order I'll ever disobey." Rivers took command of another tank and led his company forward into the town of Gwebling the next day. For the next 3 days, he continued to fight despite the wound. An infection developed. The pain was excruciating. His leg was visibly swollen and discolored. Officers and medics repeatedly urged him to evacuate. He refused every time. On the morning of November 19th, Company A advanced toward the town of Burgeltroff. They immediately came under withering fire from German anti-tank positions. Captain Williams ordered the tanks to pull back, but Rivers had spotted the enemy anti-tank guns. He and one other tank moved forward to engage them, providing covering fire for the rest of the company to withdraw. The Germans responded instantly, training all their firepower on Rivers' exposed position. 2 high-explosive shells struck his tank. Rivers was killed instantly, but his sacrifice saved his fellow tankers. Captain Williams immediately recommended Rivers for the Medal of Honor. It should have been approved quickly. Rivers' heroism was undeniable, witnessed by dozens of soldiers. But the recommendation disappeared into the bureaucracy. Rivers would not receive the Medal of Honor for more than 50 years. The reason was simple. He was black. During World War II, despite more than 1 million black Americans serving in uniform, not a single black soldier received the Medal of Honor. The oversight was so egregious, so systematic, that it could only be explained by racism. In their first month of combat alone, the 761st suffered 156 casualties, 24 killed in action, 81 wounded, and 44 non-battle losses. The unit lost 14 tanks evacuated and another 20 damaged. These numbers were staggering for a single battalion in such a short time. Any other unit would have been pulled off the line for rest and refitting. The 761st received no such relief. They were needed at the front. The momentum of Patton's advance depended on them, and they delivered. Reports from the field began to change minds. Major General Willard Paul, commander of the 26th Infantry Division, gave special commendation to the 761st, praising the speed with which they adapted to frontline conditions, the gallantry with which they faced Germany's finest troops, and the confident spirit they displayed. The white infantrymen who fought alongside the black tankers developed deep respect for them. These weren't statistics or abstract concepts. These were men who saved their lives, who provided covering fire when they were pinned down, who broke through German defenses and opened routes forward. December 1944 brought one of the greatest challenges of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, creating a dangerous bulge in the Allied lines and threatening to split the American forces in two. The Belgian town of Bastogne, a critical crossroads, was surrounded and under siege. General Eisenhower ordered Patton to break off his advance and rush north to relieve Bastogne. The 761st, now commanded by Major John George, was part of this desperate counterattack. They were assigned to support the 87th Infantry Division in capturing the town of Tille, located about 12 miles west of Bastogne. Tillit was defended by elements of the elite 13th Panzer Division's Führer-Begleit Brigade, some of the most experienced and fanatical troops in the German army. The fighting for Tillit was among the most savage of the entire war. The temperature had plunged below freezing. Snow covered the ground. German fortifications were carefully prepared, backed by machine gun nests, self-propelled guns, mortars, and armor. Several Allied units had already tried to take Tillit and failed, beaten back by the stubborn German defense. The 761st supported elements of the 87th Infantry Division with just 11 tanks. 11 tanks against an entrenched brigade. The battle lasted 2 days of continuous combat in brutal winter conditions. The Germans threw everything they had at the Black Panthers. Captain Gates lost almost all of his tanks in the process. But by evening on January 7, 1945, The 761st had captured Tillit. They had destroyed an enemy tank, 3 anti-tank guns, and killed several dozen German soldiers. Captain Gates received a Silver Star for his conduct, but the cost was terrible. 9 of the 11 tanks that went into Tillit were knocked out or destroyed. The casualties mounted, yet the mission was accomplished. A German prisoner, stunned to see black soldiers, asked Sergeant Johnny Holmes in English, "What are you doing here? This is a white man's war." Holmes offered him a cigarette and replied, "You ain't got no black or white when you're over here and the nation is in trouble. You only got Americans." Those words captured something profound about what the 761st represented. After the Battle of the Bulge, there was no rest for the Black Panthers. They were attached to the 103rd Infantry Division and given a new mission: breach the Siegfried Line, Hitler's massive defensive fortification along Germany's western border. From March 20 to 23, 1945, operating far ahead of friendly artillery and facing vicious German resistance, elements of the 761st attacked and destroyed multiple defensive positions. The battalion captured 7 German towns, more than 400 vehicles, 80 heavy weapons, 200 horses and thousands of small arms. During those 3 days alone, the 761st inflicted more than 4,000 casualties on the German army. They had become the spearhead of the American advance, the unit commanders called on when they needed to break through impossible defenses. The 761st smashed through the Siegfried Line, opening the way for the 4th Armored Division to pour into Germany. They raced eastward, liberating towns and villages, engaging German forces that were increasingly desperate and disorganized. On May 4, 1945, the 761st reached Steyr, Austria, at the Enns River, where they became one of the first American units to link up with the Soviet Red Army. The next day, along with the 71st Infantry Division, they liberated the Gunskirchen concentration camp. The German guards had fled, but the horrors they left behind were beyond comprehension. Thousands of prisoners, emaciated, diseased, barely alive, mountains of corpses, the evidence of systematic mass murder. For the soldiers of the 761st, many of whom had endured racism and discrimination their entire lives, the sight of the concentration camp was a stark reminder of where hatred and prejudice ultimately lead. They had fought against the ultimate expression of racial supremacy, the Nazi regime that had attempted to exterminate entire peoples based on twisted theories of racial purity. The irony was not lost on them. They had fought to destroy that evil, while their own countries still denied them basic civil rights. The 761st Tank Battalion endured 183 days of continuous combat without being pulled from the line. Over that time, they inflicted 130,000 casualties on German forces. Think about that number for a moment. 130,000. A single battalion, fewer than 700 men when they started, had destroyed the equivalent of multiple enemy divisions. Their casualty rate was nearly 50%. 36 men were killed in action, scores more were wounded, many grievously. They lost 71 tanks. The battalion earned approximately 300 Purple Hearts, 11 Silver Stars, and 69 Bronze Stars. In their first month alone, 3 men were recommended for the Medal of Honor. It was later determined that the 761st had fought against elements of 14 different German divisions. They had engaged some of the best troops the Wehrmacht could field and defeated them repeatedly. But what made the 761st truly elite wasn't just their combat record, impressive as it was what they represented and how they changed American military culture. General Patton, who had started the war believing that black soldiers couldn't think fast enough to fight in armor, became the only major American general to request more black soldiers, the first American general in history to integrate rifle companies, and the first to use black tank units. During the Battle of the Bulge, when German soldiers disguised themselves as Americans to ambush Allied troops, Patton solved this problem by ordering black soldiers to guard checkpoints, with orders to shoot any white soldiers who acted suspiciously. He trusted them with this critical security task because he knew they could execute it. His evolution wasn't complete. He never fully abandoned his racist beliefs. But the 761st forced him to acknowledge reality over prejudice. If Patton, one of the most stubborn and opinionated generals in the American military, could change his mind based on the performance of black soldiers, then anyone could. The legacy of the 761st extended far beyond their military achievements. Commander of the 17th Airborne Division, General John Miley, stated that he was able to send many more of his soldiers home alive as a direct result of the effective support of the 761st. White infantrymen who fought alongside the black tankers went home with stories that challenged the racist assumptions of American society. They had seen courage and skill firsthand. They had owed their lives to black soldiers. These experiences planted seeds that would grow into the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Jackie Robinson, who had been court-martialed for refusing to sit at the back of a bus during his time with the 761st, went on to break baseball's color barrier in 1947, changing American sports and society forever. He carried with him the lessons he had learned from his time with the Black Panthers, that courage and perseverance could overcome even the most entrenched prejudice. The 761st Tank Battalion was deactivated on June 1, 1946, in Germany. The men came home to a country that was still segregated, still discriminatory, still unwilling to grant them the full rights of citizenship they had fought to defend. Men who had fought bravely alongside white infantrymen now found themselves treated as second-class citizens, sent to sit in the back of buses behind white people who had never left home. It was a bitter homecoming. Many veterans spoke of the pain of being refused service at restaurants, being barred from hotels, facing the same prejudice as before the war, despite having risked everything for their country. Recognition of what the 761st accomplished was shamefully slow in coming. For decades, their story was largely forgotten or ignored. They received no presidential unit citation, no acknowledgement commensurate with their achievements. But they never forgot what they had done, and neither did the soldiers who had fought beside them. In 1978, finally, President Jimmy Carter bestowed a Presidential Unit Citation on the 761st Tank Battalion, 33 years after the war ended. In 1993, the Army commissioned Shaw University to research whether there had been racial disparity in the awarding of Medals of Honor during World War II. The researchers found clear evidence of discrimination. Out of 433 Medals of Honor awarded to soldiers in World War II, not one had gone to a black American, despite more than 1 million serving in uniform. The study recommended that several black soldiers be reconsidered for the award. On January 13, 1997, more than 50 years after the end of the war, President Bill Clinton awarded the Medal of Honor to 7 black soldiers from World War II, including Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers of the 761st Tank Battalion. Vernon Baker was the only recipient still living to receive his medal in person. The others, including Rivers, received their medals posthumously. Rivers' sister, Grace Woodfork, accepted the honor on her brother's behalf. She was an elderly woman by then, but she remembered her brother with pride. He had given everything for a country that hadn't given him equality, and now, finally, his sacrifice was being recognized. In 2005, a monument to the 761st Tank Battalion was unveiled at Fort Hood, Texas, where they had trained 6 decades earlier. Several surviving veterans attended the ceremony. The monument features 4 black granite tablets surrounding a life-size marble sculpture of a soldier kneeling atop a black granite pedestal. It stands on 761st Tank Battalion Drive, a permanent reminder of what these men accomplished. Their story has been told in books, documentaries and films. NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, whose father served as an artilleryman during World War II, wrote a definitive history of the unit titled Brothers in Arms. The epic story of the 761st Tank Battalion, WB's Forgotten Heroes. Abdul-Jabbar had been inspired to research the battalion after watching a documentary in 1992, and his book helped ensure that their legacy would not be forgotten. So what were the secrets behind these elite soldiers? What made them so effective that even a general who doubted them came to rely on them? The first secret was training. The 761st trained for nearly 2 years, far longer than most American tank units. They knew their equipment inside and out. They could perform repairs in the field, adapt to changing circumstances, and execute complex maneuvers under fire. When they entered combat, they were as prepared as any soldiers could be. The second secret was leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates believed in his men and fought for them, even when it hurt his own career prospects. He demanded excellence because he knew they would be judged more harshly than white soldiers. His men responded to his leadership with fierce loyalty and determination to prove him right. The third secret was motivation. These soldiers were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They knew that their performance would determine how America viewed black soldiers for generations to come. Captain John Long expressed it perfectly. Not for God and country, but for me and my people. This was my motivation, pure and simple, when I entered the army. I swore to myself there would never be a headline saying my men and I chickened. They fought with a purpose that went beyond military objectives. The fourth secret was resilience. These men had grown up facing discrimination and prejudice. They had learned to persevere in the face of injustice, to keep pushing forward when others would have given up. That resilience served them well in combat, where conditions were brutal and the odds were often against them. They had been underestimated their entire lives, and they were used to exceeding expectations. The fifth secret was brotherhood. The 761st developed an extraordinary bond. They depended on each other absolutely. In a segregated army, in a racist society, they had only each other to rely on. That created a unit cohesion that was remarkable even by military standards. They fought not just for their country or their unit, but for each other, and that made them nearly unstoppable. And perhaps the final secret was this: they had nothing to prove to themselves. They already knew they were capable. They already knew they were courageous. They already knew they could succeed. The only people who doubted them were others, and those doubts fueled their determination to excel. The story of the 761st Tank Battalion is not just a military story. It's an American story about courage in the face of injustice, about excellence in the face of doubt, about perseverance in the face of hatred. These men fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against Nazi Germany and one against American racism. They won both, though the second victory took far longer and is still ongoing. They proved that skill, courage, and determination have nothing to do with the color of one's skin. They forced even their doubters to acknowledge their excellence, and they paved the way for the integration of the American military, which happened just a few years after the war ended, in part because of what the 761st and other black units had demonstrated on the battlefield. Today, when we look back at World War II, we often focus on the big names: Patton, Eisenhower, Bradley. We remember the major campaigns: D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, the drive into Germany. But we must also remember the smaller stories, the ones that were overlooked or forgotten, the ones that don't fit neatly into the narrative of American heroism, because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our history. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for a country that didn't treat them as equals. They risked everything to defend freedoms they themselves didn't fully enjoy. They endured discrimination, segregation, and systematic denial of recognition for their achievements, and yet they served with honor, courage, and distinction. They became elite soldiers not because of favorable conditions or special treatment, but despite facing obstacles that would have broken lesser men. Their motto was, "Come out fighting," and that's exactly what they did every single day, in every battle, against every enemy, both foreign and domestic. When we talk about the greatest generation, we must include soldiers like those of the 701st. When we talk about American heroes, we must remember Reuben Rivers, who gave his life while leading his men into battle. We must remember Jackie Robinson, who fought racial injustice on the battlefield before fighting it on the baseball diamond. We must remember the hundreds of other men whose names are less famous, but whose courage was no less remarkable. They deserve to be remembered not as footnotes in history, but as central figures in the story of America's struggle to live up to its own ideals. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. We're committed to bringing you the most powerful and important stories from World War II, stories that deserve to be told and remembered. But I need your help. We must reach 100 comments on this video to continue bringing you more inspirational historical content like this. So please take a moment right now and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about the 761st Tank Battalion and their incredible legacy. What part of their story resonated most with you? How do you think their experiences relate to ongoing struggles for equality and justice? And if you want, tell me from which part of the world you're watching this video. Your comment matters, and I want to read it and reply. For more exciting stories like this one, click on the video appearing on your screen right now.